Gittin Daf Mem Hey Amid Aleph, Miracles and Magic, the Nate de Rav Nachman. The act of subjugating one's emotions and one's feelings to the power of the intellect is an action that generates energy. Like any form of friction, friction generates energy. Friction can generate light and heat. And so when you create the friction between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, between the things you want to do and the things you need to do, that friction in itself can create energy. And we'll see this idea developed in the sugya. We're looking at a very challenging piece of Agadita. And very often people either skip it or they gloss over it because it's so challenging. But we'll learn it and we'll understand it. It's based on a posuk in Kohelet, which in itself is very challenging, certainly in today's environment, where Kohelet says, Asher od biksha nafshi v'lo matzati. There's something else I've really looked for, I've really searched for, and I've never found it. Adam echad me'elef matzati. I've found a great man among 1,000 ordinary men. And Rashi explains the Chazal that 1,000 go into the yeshiva and 100 come out good, and out of the 110 come out, and out of the 10, 1 comes out. So 1 in 1,000 you get a great man. That I found. V'isha b'chol eile lo matzati. But a woman, even among 1,000, I never found a great one. Okay? Shlomo Melech puts it out there. Our job is to make meaning of the Torah and apply the meaning to the 21st century. Our job is not to adapt the meaning of the Torah to the 21st century. The Torah is the Torah. And we need to find the meaning, and then we need to adapt it. What is the meaning? How do we understand this? The Metzudas David kind of has an interesting way out, and he says, firstly, it's talking about a human being who is great in their own rights, not by comparison. So there are lots of people who are great. If you look at the generation, they were great in their generation. But to look at somebody who is great, whether you see anybody else or not compared to, you know this person's great. That's what it's talking about. And secondly, when he says even 1,000 among women I haven't found, he's talking about his own wives, says the Metzudas. He's got 1,000 wives, including his Pilagshim. So he's not making a comment on womanhood. He's saying, I've got a sample of 1,000 women. If I take a sample of 1,000 men, I can sometimes find a great man. But I've got 1,000 wives, none of them are that great, which is also interesting. But Rashi doesn't take it so apologetically. Rashi says just quite clearly that just v'isha b'choleila afilu be'elef l'kach ata tzarich lizaher ba. You've got to be careful when it comes to women, because even 1 in 1,000 you don't find one on that level. What does he mean, and what is that all about? And it gets a little bit more difficult to understand in the Gemara. The Gemara is very intriguing. Benated Rav Nachman bechashan kadra biyadayu. The daughters of Rav Nachman used to stir the pot with their raw hands, without an implement or without a glove. Kashlei Rav Ilish, and that people used to think they must be great tzidkaniyot because miracles happen. Rav Ilish sees this and he's not very impressed. On the contrary, he says, can they possibly be so great that this miracle happens to them? Shlomo HaMelech says, Adam echad melech matzati v'isha b'chalei lo matzati. Ha'ike benate de Rav Nachman. How could Shlomo HaMelech make such a comment when they're the daughters of Rav Nachman, if they're so great that they can stir the pots with their hands and not feel the heat? That's what does Shlomo HaMelech mean he hasn't found a great woman? Gar maluhu milti v'ishtavya. The way the Mashor learns this is the women's showing off of their prowess to make themselves look saintly, because sometimes people do that. That caused them to be captured together with Rav Ilish. And they're captured, and one day there's a man sitting there, a non-Jewish man who's also one of the prisoners, who understood the talk of birds. It's interesting, we're learning a piece of Shlomo HaMelech, and here's a man, a guy, a non-Jewish man, who understood the language of birds. Ata urva v'kakarile, it was a raven came and started calling. So Rav Ilish says, what is this bird saying? He says, the bird is saying, Ilish barach, Ilish barach. Ilish, run for your life, escape. Amar urva shikrahu v'lo samich le'ele. He says, we can see from Parshas Noach, the Mashor explains it this way, we can see from Noach that the raven doesn't always tell the truth. So you can't rely on it. You see, Rav Ilish is quite cynical when it comes to miracles. Other people would say, a simon. Look what the Orev said. This is the raven gives a message. The man understands the raven. It's time for me to escape. No, says Rav Ilish. Just as I don't understand the Benate de Rav Nachman because there's a posuk in Kohelet against it, so I don't accept the words of an Orev because there's a posuk in Parshas Noach against it. Adachi ate yoinav. Then a pigeon came, a dove came, and he said, "What's the dove saying?" He said, "Ilish brach, Ilish brach. Hama Knesset Israel keyona metari shmama metrachish linis." Pigeon is saying this. The Jewish people are compared to pigeons, and we see in Parshas Noach when when Noach sent out the dove, it gave the right information. So one can rely on a dove, but not on an oirev. If the dove also says that I should run for my life, then this must be a sign that there's going to be a miracle. She says, let me go and check on the daughters of Rav Nachman. If they've remained faithful and frum and yorei shamayim, I'll take them with me. If not, I don't want them to mess up my chances of a miracle. He says, I know that women talk to each other in the washrooms, so he goes and listens behind the washrooms, and he hears them say, we used to have husbands in the Hardoi, and now we've got husbands here. So we must tell our captors not to send us home. We're actually quite happy here. We're enjoying these relationships better than our own husbands. Kind of a Patty Hearst kind of syndrome where they become infatuated with their own captors. So he's very concerned. The Marshal explains, he knows, Rav Ilish realizes that they've been seduced or raped. He knows what goes on there. The question was, were they willing or was it an onus? Were they raped or were they seduced? When he hears this conversation, he realizes they were seduced. So they're not tzedekah. These are not tzedekahs. Nevertheless, they become free as well. He runs away. A miracle happens. The bird whisperer doesn't get a miracle, says the Marshal. So you see there that even that level of wisdom doesn't help when it comes to Nisim. For Nisim, you need tzidkus. For Rav Ilish, there's a miracle. He escapes. The man doesn't. And later on, the women get out. And the Marshal says they get out because they were redeemed. There were no miracles for them. The community paid and got them out. They obviously weren't too happy. And then he realized that the way they were stirring the pots, they continued to stir the pots when they came home as well. And Rav Ilish realized these are no tzidkanios. These women are not righteous women, and therefore they must be doing this with some form of magic. Whether magic is sleight of hand, or magic means understanding how physics and chemistry works. There are lots of ways you can make things happen that are not miracles. Not everything that looks unbelievable is a miracle. And you see that Rav Ilish is quite careful when he decides something is a nes or something is a sign from heaven. He's not too impressed with miracles. That's the Gemara. Rabbi Lapin Steinman asks the obvious question. And the obvious question is, what does Shlomo HaMelech mean, and why is Rabbi Ilish so amazed at these daughters of Rav Nachman? We've got many great women in the Torah. We've got Chana and Avigail. We've got the mothers, Atzorah, Rivka, Rochel, Leah. We've got lots of tzadkaniyot. And in Gemara Ksubas we have the wife of Mar Ukva, who was a tzaddikus. Chulda was a neviah. Why is he so amazed that the daughters of Rav Nachman might be exceptional women? Okay, you've got a posuk in Kohelet, so learn it like the Metzudos learns it, that this is about his own wives. He's not making a statement about women altogether. Why is Rav Ilish so convinced that these women are not tzidkaniyot based on the posuk in Kohelet? So I want to explain this to you in the following way. It's not that they're not tzidkaniyot. Rabbi Lapin Steinman is right. He goes on to answer it in a different way. But of course they've been incredibly great women throughout history. That's not what Shlomo HaMelech means. Of course not. We're talking here about a particular type of tzidkus, the type of tzidkus that enables a person to withstand the pain of fire without feeling it. That's what's important. It's a specific manifestation of greatness in a person. What is the nature of that greatness? So I've mentioned before, Rabbi Lapin quotes the Maram Rutenberg, and here I bring you the quote from the Maram Rutenberg in the Chuvas, where he says, once a person makes up his mind that he's genuinely willing to give his life on Kiddush Hashem, he doesn't feel it when they do it. They can torture him, and he doesn't feel anything. And you should know that that's so, because if a person touches fire, you pull your hand away immediately. It's terribly painful. And yet there were people who were burnt at the stake, and they didn't shout. There was no reaction, there was no response. It's as if the fire didn't affect them. Says the Maram Rutenberg, so you see from this, that once you've committed to be Moser Nefesh, there is no pain as a result of the torture. And we have the Rebellion then expands this idea to the Gemara in Brochos with Rabbi Akiva, where the Talmudim say to Rabbi Akiva when they're tearing his skin apart, and he says Shema Yisrael, and he says, "This is my opportunity for Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha." They say Ad Kedei Kach. This far, and Rebellion explains because he was doing it with joy, like he did any other simcha. That's why they were amazed. They weren't amazed that he was doing it, that he gave his life. What they're amazed is that while they're torturing him, he's saying Kriya Shema with simcha, with absolute joy. And Rebbe says, you see that in the Yerushalmi and Masech Sota, where it says, Kari Shoma V'gochach. He laughed. He was laughing while he was saying Kriya Shema. He was happy for being able to be Mekayim the mitzvah. Says Rebbe, you see that as the Maharam Rutenberg says, they feel no pain. They're able to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem with absolute simcha at that particular time. And this is this capacity to manage heat and fire is the capacity that comes from the conversion of human matter into energy. And we see that happening. We see that there's a Rashi, I've spoken to you about it before in Sanhedrin, we'll get there in Mitzvah Hashem on Daf Lamed Aleph, where it talks about why Mar Ukva was called Tzutzita, the sparkling one. And Rashi brings I gather there that Mar Ukva was about Tshuva, and he fell in love with a woman who was married, and obviously nothing could happen, and then he got ill, and this married woman, he wanted her to be with him because that way he would become better, but that couldn't be, and eventually she became poor, and she came to him for a loan or for tzedakah, and she said, I'll do whatever you want. If you want me, I need it, I'll do whatever you want. And Kavash Yitzrof Tarol Shalom in Etrapa, he gave her money, sent her on his way, and he didn't do anything to her, and he was afterwards healed. And when Marukva used to walk in the marketplace, there was fire, there was light coming out of his face. You see the friction here. When you create friction out of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov, that friction, that dominance of the seichel, that dominating your passions and your senses and your emotions with your mind, that friction converts human matter into energy. And there's fire around his face. And there's the famous story of the Yerushalmi with the father of Elisha ben Avua. At the bris, he's got his guests there, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and they're busy learning Torah, and there's fire around them. Rabbi Avua, the father of Elisha, is so impressed. This is the bris of his son Elisha. He's so impressed that he says, I'll dedicate my son to Torah. If that's the power of Torah, that when people are learning Torah, they convert into fire. There's fire around them. If that's the power of Torah, I want my son to learn Torah. And the Gemara says, because it wasn't L'Shem Shemayim, that's why Elisha ben Avua never became the great man that he could have become, and he became Acher instead. But there again, we see the power of Torah to convert matter into energy. And why did the fire not burn them? And why did the fire of Mar Ukva not burn Mar Ukva? Because they themselves are energy at that point. Energy and energy. The fire doesn't burn energy. They become transformed into energy. That the human body becomes transformed into energy. And the same with the Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yehuda in the case of the Yerushalmi. That capacity to dominate the senses with the intellect to that degree that no matter how passionate and how burning bright the feelings are, the emotions are, the sensuality is, that a person's ability to dominate those feelings with seichel, with intellect, and make a rational decision despite all the emotions, that's a masculine capability. We've often talked about these chazals. We've got to understand there's a masculine energy and a feminine energy. It doesn't mean that there aren't women who can do it, and it doesn't mean there aren't men who cannot do it. But when a man does it, it enhances his masculinity. When a man conquers his feelings with intellect and willpower, that makes him more masculine, not less masculine. When a woman does that, it makes her less feminine. Because femininity is, when it says, the Gemara says that in Nashim Da'atan Kalot, that women's intellectual capacity, their rational, analytical capacity, is lightweight. It doesn't mean they don't have it. It just means compared to the other senses, to the other forces in the human being, it's not the dominant one. Their dominant force is feeling and emotion and sensuality. Of course they've got intellect. They may have the same intellect as men. We learned that not so long ago in a Matmonim, that in some ways their understanding of Chazal is more direct and quicker. That's not the issue. The issue is in relation to the other forces of their beings, Rational intellect is not the dominant one. The dominant one is feeling, intuition, emotion, sensuality. Those are the dominant feelings of a woman. And for a woman to subjugate those feelings and become all professional and analytical, she can do it. Of course she can do it. But it doesn't enhance her femininity. When a man does it, it actually enhances his masculinity. And that's how we need to understand when Rav Ilish looks at these girls, what are they able to do? They can stir the pot with their hands. That means, as the Maharam Rutenberg explains, and Rebbe Elia takes it further and explains it in great detail, how to be able to focus totally on the mitzvah so that you don't feel the pain. It's total, it's meditating totally on that one thing, which is the mitzvah. And they use meditation for pain management, that if you can focus all your attention on something other than the pain, you can actually exclude the feeling of the pain. That's how Rebbe Elia explains the capacity of these Gedolei Yisrael to be able to be so focused on the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem that they don't feel the pain and they don't feel the agony. And that's what Rav Ilash sees in these girls as they're stirring the pot, the daughters of Rav Nachman. And he says that's not a feminine capacity. It's possible, and he needs to check it out, and that's why he goes to listen to see how they behave in captivity. It's possible, but it's unlikely. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech meant. That capacity of greatness that enables a man to completely submerge his feelings and his emotions and his intuition and his sensuality, to submerge them to the dominance of the intellect, that capacity, I've found 1 in 1,000 men have got that. But even among 1,000 women, I haven't found that a woman has that, or neither should she have it, because that's not the Kvod Bat Melech Pnima, that's not her inner beauty. Her inner beauty is her feeling, her inner beauty is her intuition, her inner feeling is her passion. That's the Kvod Bat Melech Pnima. But for a man, it's different. A man has a different avodah, a different job of work to do in this world, and he needs different kelim, needs different tools and utensils. And for a man, it's more natural than it is for a woman, and that's why Rav Ilish was not so sure. So we need to appreciate that when we use the power of no, when we say no to ourselves, it's not just that we're avoiding doing an avera. When we say no to ourselves, we're building our energy, we're building spiritual energy. We're raising our stature, we're raising who we are, we're changing the nature of who we are. We're converting matter into energy every time we say no. There's a WhatsApp group that my son-in-law showed me in the United States. It's called Vayema'en. Every day they send out a little 3-minute divrei chizuk on the idea of Vayema'en, when Yosef refused Eshet Potiphar. And the site is called Vayema'en, and each talk is a little 3-minute talk on the power of saying no. What the power of saying no. Animals can't say no. Animals are driven by instinct. Human beings can be instinctually attracted to something and override their instinct with a no. That's what a human being can do, and that's a particularly masculine quality. And not that women can't do it, as we've said, but it's a particularly masculine quality to be able to subjugate everything else in our personality to the power of the intellect to say, where necessary, no.